of the interview?
My name's Mark Ogilvie, or they call me Mod Mark in RuneScape, for I am the design director of RuneScape. And I've been here for 12 years.
Wow. What does the design director do? What's your job description as design director?
I always consider myself a manager of goblins rather than a manager of people. So as a design director, I help to identify the types of content that we should be working on in any given year, identify the kind of needs for the player, that kind of communication between management and design, if you like, or implementation. So the kind of needs of the business are translated in a way that my designers and developers can understand. I also consider, well, I don't consider myself, I'm used as a bit of a figurehead, I guess, for the company. I've been here for a long time, the players recognise who I am, so I do a lot of journalist interviews and talks and conferences and those kind of things as well. I'm also in charge of looking after the brand of RuneScape, so helping to define exactly what the product is, and perhaps how we could use our IP in different ways in the games industry.
So do you have like a typical working day, or is it something that kind of can change from day to day and evolving? It always changes. Those different bits that I just described can be really big or really small at different times during the year. So my day is very, very fluid. Things will change all the time, and obviously because I've got a massive development team, sometimes they need my help with things, and rather than be a bottleneck, I try and move things around so I can help the team the best way I can. Is that what drew you towards design director, the fact that it's a role that can keep changing and isn't just the same thing every day?
I think my role changed as the company got bigger.
Okay.
So I kind of became head of content about 10 years ago, and that was much more hands-on, much more design work, much more getting involved with giving feedback, much more of the craft itself, mentoring, helping people become designers. And then over time, because the company's got bigger, we've got more and more layers within the company, my job role has changed quite a lot. That means some good things for my team, because I think arguably they've got a bit more freedom in what they do. They haven't got me looking over their shoulder all the time. But because we're a bigger brand now, bigger company, there is more responsibility for that, and that's kind of what I look after.
In terms of the growth of the company then, can you sort of give us an idea of some of the history, sort of how it was formed, what it was like back 10, 12 years ago?
Okay.
It's like now? So
RuneScape was originally created as a bedroom project. The founders, Andrew in particular, were big fans of board games and traditional tabletop role-playing games growing up as kids, and they wanted to sort of try around with JavaScript, Java programming, various different things like that, and came up with a couple of ideas for a kind of living, breathing fantasy world where players could gain experience points just like their Dungeons and Dragons characters. He kind of created a system. Paul kind of came in and developed the world and a few quests, and then the little brother did some graphics and designed some of the characters. Their mum and dad got involved doing various different things. So I always tell the story that the sound of fishing in RuneScape, in the original classic version of the game, the sound of fishing was them dropping things in a bowl of washing up to sort of get that sound effect. The sound of cooking in the game was their mum cooking them some bacon for a bacon sandwich. So it was a really kind of homegrown affair, and I just tried it out, put it online, see if it would work. They wanted also to explore this concept, which was absolutely brand new at the time, of the idea of a graphical adventure game, because there were lots of MUDs out there. People were big fans of MUDs, but he wanted to have one with a bit of a graphical presence. But also the idea that I wouldn't have to save my game to a floppy disk, and if I wanted to go to a different computer and play the game, I wouldn't have to install anything. It wouldn't take me ages to play it. So you could move from computer laboratory, if you're at university, different sites, go to a new place and then just log on to your game. At the time, that was a pretty revolutionary idea of looking at things. And the game was free to play completely to start with, had a handful of skills. There were monsters to fight, train your smithing, your wood cutting, whatever. but it started getting a bit bigger. There were a lot more fans than they were expecting, and they had, I don't know, probably about 2,000 or 3,000 active players, which they were quite impressed by. Yeah. The servers were run entirely on advert panels running around the outside of the screen, and then all of a sudden the .com bubble burst. The money through advertising wasn't great, and they were really struggling to work out how they were going to pay for their servers. All the money that they were making was going back into the game to produce more servers and not really pay them any income, because they weren't really thinking like that. It's still a hobby, and actually a lot of the vibe of the company now is still about it being a kind of hobby, really. So they thought, right, how are we going to pay for these things? So they thought, well, let's make a members version of the game. We'll get people to maybe pay, I don't know, like £2, £3, $5 to play every month. We'll make some members only content, some quests, some skills. We'll see how that goes. And then over the first weekend, they had enough people to pay for the servers, so they were really impressed with the kind of response. But then, of course, you've got people paying for a service, and they expect a certain level of customer support, or they expect a certain level of quality. So then they started employing people to look after that, to you know, deal with customer queries and help people find lost passwords and things like that. And that really was right at the beginning. I joined in 2003. I'm losing my dates now, but anyway, and originally doing customer support. And I was amazed that the company had this incredibly like, well, that's the best word. They were very green behind the gills, right? Really new to the industry, really had no idea what they were doing. They were just doing something because they were fun and they liked it. And fortunately, there were enough other people that seemed to enjoy it as well. They didn't really believe in things like design documents. They didn't really have testing plans. They didn't really have a schedule. There was no concept of planning, really. It was just, oh, I fancy doing this now, so I'll do it. So I kind of came in, and because my own background is with traditional games as well, so I worked for Dungeons & Dragons for a while, and I've been published by various different sort of traditional games. So I kind of came in and suddenly realised some of the talents that I had, because I never really considered myself to be a games designer, but some of the things that I knew about in terms of how you plan creativity, they really liked. So I kind of got involved, and then everything just went mental. So we just had thousands and thousands and thousands of players who wanted to pay us money. We couldn't buy servers quick enough to accommodate for the amount of players that we had coming in. So all of our worlds were 100% busy all the time. There were queues of people waiting to play. And we couldn't hire people quick enough to deal with the level of password supports and queries that we were having about the game. It's a really good time. So we set ourselves loads of financial targets, and we'd be like, right, if we hit, not financial targets actually, there were membership number targets. So we might be at about 10,000, or let's say 100,000 people, right? And we're like, right, if we hit 125,000, then we'll go to Alton Towers for the, like, brilliant, yeah, great. And we do it the next day, because there were just thousands of people coming in. Like, it was too much. And I remember having conversations with the guys at the time, and they're like, we're having too many players. What can we do to slow down the amount of new customers we've got? That's madness, right? Absolute madness. But like I say, it never really felt like a business. It was just a bunch of mates like-minded individuals who were making games because that's what they wanted to do. So the game got much bigger really, really quickly, and it meant that we had to change much faster than we really wanted to. And suddenly there were a lot more players that had expectations, and they were behaving like customers rather than just people who wanted to play your cool game. Sure, yeah. And that changes the way that you think about games and business. So the game's getting bigger and bigger. We converted from RuneScape Classic to RuneScape 2. That also went absolutely ballistic, even faster. We did loads and loads of really kind of interesting things, new, innovative things that we were trying to do with the gameplay. We didn't really have any competitors in our mind. While things like World of Warcraft came along, the way we saw it is they were going for a completely different sort of player than us, and we were quite happy with the uniqueness of RuneScape at the time. So we carried on plugging away, doing the things that we were doing. We started playing around with like player-made housing systems within the game. Nobody else was doing things like that. We've got loads and loads of different things that we were doing, and the company was just getting bigger and bigger. We started moving offices. We started at this place across the road called St John's Innovation Centre, and we just started with one small room. And then as we were getting more staff, we got the next room across and knocked a hole through the wall so we could make a door, and then another one and another one and another one. And then the guys who owned the building were like, you probably should move to this big office. And that was a real change for us, because suddenly we're in this massive, great big office and we're like, oh my God, it's like we're a proper company now. So I guess, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of history. And now we're, you know, it's really interesting, because around about sort of 2007, 2008, we kind of hit our peak, as it were, with our highest numbers of concurrent players and our highest ever membership. And then the marketplace got a lot busier. People started having their attention drawn to different places. Things like YouTube were becoming a lot more popular. RuneScape's always had this vibe of a game that I can play while doing other things at the same time, sort of what people might determine second screen gaming these days. Because there's lots of content in RuneScape which is incredibly low intensity, deliberately so. And people's attention were getting drawn off to other places, and their lifestyles were changing. You've got to remember that for some people in 2008, they'd already been playing the game for 6 years, same game 6 years. And even now, over 60% of our active players have played the game for more than 6 years. So they have a very specific way of what they think the game should represent. Anyway, so we started going through some interesting changes. We started noticing a big influence of things like bots. There was rife across the industry at the time. I feel like we were the only ones brave enough to say we've got a problem, we're going to do something about it, rather than just pretend like it's not there, which for me a lot of games seem to do. But actually having a war, and it is a war, let's be honest, with bot makers who are trying to make an income out of what you're doing, or gold farmers, or whatever you want to call them. That is an arms race, and you have to put a lot of attention and effort into that. So around 2008 we changed some fundamental parts of the game because of the influence of bots. And you know, looking back on it now, we were too dramatic with what we did. It was the right reasons to do it, but probably the wrong things to do. That had a big effect on the game. It had a big effect on the players. So we removed the wilderness, we removed freeform trading, we removed a big part of the game, the freedom, which is so important to our players, and we realised too late that we'd taken elements of that freedom away. So we experienced some decline for a little while. Then we did things like bring the wilderness back. We've changed things, we've changed business models. We've got the influence of microtransactions, like a lucky wheel you can spin, or cosmetic item shops and things like that. We brought all of those things in. Then, like a few years ago, we had RuneScape 3, so we completely changed our graphical HUD. We also made some fundamental changes to the combat system. Again, players weren't necessarily very passionate about that, so 3 years ago we created the old school servers, which are like a slice of our history, where we've taken a snapshot of the game from 2007, and they can play that game now. So they're playing a game which you may argue is 8 years old, but that has its own life. That has its own player base, its own segmented economy, and they have a different way of doing things. But you know, we're all still part of the same family, the RuneScape family. And then more recently, we've with RuneScape 3, we changed the combat system. We've changed it back again now, so you can sort of play in an old sort of legacy style. And over the last couple of years, we've experienced quite a lot of growth again. So it's quite fantastic being in a playing or running a game which is that old, which is now in growth again. That's quite a cool place to be. Yeah. So there we go. There's a long answer to your question about history.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because you said it started off as, you know, like mates in a pretty small room, and
yeah,
they're a team of what is it, over 400 or 500 people potentially. Yep. Do you ever see a time where where the company is like an international company? You hear these crazy stories about like some of the big, admittedly lots of big AAA games that have sort of 30 teams working on them across the whole world. Or is it important for you still to kind of have sense of you know everyone, you can speak to everyone face to face, much as it was 10 years ago. It's just on a bigger scale.
Completely is the short answer to that question. We have in the past had offices in London. We've had even like some people in the States working on different games. We've had parts of our history where we've had our customer support department in a different building across the road. Just didn't feel right. I think it's really important to have everybody under one roof. I hate emails because emails are really just a very cheap way of trying to communicate to someone, and you can very rarely get across emotions and things like that via emails. And I guess I'm quite an emotional designer, the way that I would describe myself. And I much prefer if people just stand up and go to talk to someone, and it's easier to do that if you know you're all in the same building.
With the team being as big as it is now, do you find yourself having to be almost more picky about who you recruit? Like, what's the recruitment process like if someone wanted to get into games development, potentially work here? What's the process?
I think we were a lot pickier before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when I used to run the recruitment process for developers and artists and the like, we actually had a 3-day trial that you had to get through. And now it's a kind of 2-hour interview, couple of hours of maybe some kind of trial stuff that we might ask you to do, and then like a 3-month probation. But so I think in many ways it's kind of easier to work for Jagex now than it was before.
Oh, fair enough.
I think would be the answer. Also, we have a really good HR department now, so they're much better at dealing with CVs than I ever was, because we just had to do it on top of our jobs. In terms of coming to work for Jagex, I think it's a lot easier than it was before. But people rely too much. Just let me go off on one just for a slight moment. People rely on too much on university courses for games design and doing games degree courses. There is no substitute for getting yourself out there and making your own game. There are so many decent software packages that you can use now, and really good websites that will host your games for free. People should use those. They shouldn't just rely on a piece of paper that says, oh, I've done a games design course, therefore I know all about games. We still hire a lot of people who've never done those courses, and in many ways, products of those courses think they're good at everything, and they're usually good at nothing. That's pretty a bold statement, I'll say that. Most of those courses create jack of all trades. A lot of students that I talk to that have come out of university, I say, what do you want to do in the games industry? And they say, I don't know. That is not a good thing. They should identify one of the things that they learn about and get good at that thing.
Do you feel like you're getting like more and more applications all the time? Because it seems to be like the independent development scene is getting more popular all the time. So things like Kickstarters and things. So people should go out and make their own games. It seems like it's easier than ever for people.
It's easier to get funding for those games, for sure.
Yeah. And you have to make sure, of course, that you meet the promises.
Well, let's not get too into that.
Do you feel, in a way, I was kind of thinking about this, because you're speaking about how sort of freedom and creativity is really important to people who play RuneScape. Do you feel like that's kind of gone full circle in games as a whole? Because I seem to think that that definitely used to be the case, and then we kind of had a period, and still to an extent, where if a game was going to be developed, it was because people had looked at a graph and thought, well, that might get a sequel, we're going to make this amount of money. Whereas now I feel like it's kind of gone back round again. We've got games like Minecraft and No Man's Sky is coming out, where it's all about sort of freedom and creativity rather than... Generally I agree with you. I think that is because of the movements in the indie scene, not because of the movements in the AAA part of the industry. I think actually, if anything, AAA games are getting more formulaic. And because there's more big, what I call Hollywood business in games these days, and people who want to see a return to their cash, that there are a lot of companies who are less prepared to take a risk, which means that you find a lot less innovation within our industry. That is very much the case within AAA. However, good indie games come along and they make a load of money, and then big businesses go, oh look, I want a slice of that pie. So it means the AAA industry is going to change quicker because of
the impact of indie titles, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So as a market as a whole, I agree with you, but only because of the influence of indie and things like Kickstarter.
What are your thoughts as one of the UK's biggest developers? What do you think of sort of the UK gaming development scene at the moment? Because a lot of the sort of promising indie projects that people are excited about at the moment are being born out of the UK.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Part of our culture is creativity. There's a reason why things like storytelling is a big part of our culture. We kind of forget about it, unfortunately, but we have a very it's a big part of British history being inventors and being at the sort of forefront of technology. I don't see why games should be any different from that, and I'm really pleased by the cool kind of things that are coming out at the moment. We've got a little studio in Cambridge called Inkle. They made 80 Days last year, which was my favourite game of last year. And there's just a few people who are like, I really want to do something cool, let's go off and do it. And they've managed to find some money to do it. And I think that's fantastic. And I like going and talking to people like that, because it reminds me why I love what I do. And actually, it's one of the best things about Jagex is, despite us being in this massive building and despite there being like over 400 people in here, whatever the number is, I feel that we still have that independent indie vibe. Whilst we might have investors, they don't tell us what we should be making. That RuneScape's a bit of an unknown quantity to them, and they just trust that we know what we're doing and that we should get on with it, which is great. Most importantly though, I think it is a huge part of any games design that you allow the individual creativity of the makers to get into the game. So you don't have such a rigid pattern that games must fit into, to allow the developers and the players to express themselves within the game. And every single person who's ever worked on anything to do with RuneScape has got themselves in that game in some way or another, whether it's an artist or a tester or a web designer or a producer. There's an element of them in the game, and I think it's an incredibly important thing. And I think that's part and parcel of us being a creative culture.
Yeah. And do you think that license to be really creative is important to keeping the players playing RuneScape and not being drawn towards other games, other similar games? Because you see a lot of MMOs that come out, they seem to be chasing World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the last sort of big release that was being heralded as the WoW killer that didn't then go free to play within like a year. So in a way, it's almost more competition, because the barrier of entry for other MMOs is also quite low,
so
because they're free to play.
I think one of the things that really is testing our little slice of the industry right now is that people's lifestyles have changed dramatically. I don't think that your average person coming into games fresh now is looking for a hardcore MMO experience like World of Warcraft. And these new games that are coming on the market that are trying to chase that are never going to succeed, because that player doesn't want to shift. They're happy playing the game they want to play, whether it's RuneScape or EVE Online or Lords of the Rings or whatever. There are a load of old games that have been out there for a while, and people don't want to stop playing those games. They're not interested in something else filling that gap. And new people do not have that gap in their lives anymore. So we have to fundamentally ask ourselves, what does a modern MMO look like? People say to me, oh, Clash of Clans, that's a modern MMO. You can't put Clash of Clans next to RuneScape and say that's the same genre. But there are principles of Clash of Clans which are very similar to principles that we have. But the user engages and consumes the product in a completely different way. But some of the things they represent are the same. And that's one of the big questions. And actually one of the interesting things we're looking at right now in the studio is, if you're going to make an MMO today from scratch on a tablet, what would it look like? How would it play? And that is something that we're doing 10 meters away from where we're sat, and that is something I'm really interested in right now.
It's just because I asked some of the community to offer some questions. I was going to come to them later because it kind of comes off of that Have you been tempted to bring RuneScape or other games, other projects to other platforms?
Yes.
Especially now that it's easier than ever to get a game on a console.
Yeah.
They're really almost encouraging indie developers and free-to-play games to come onto the console. Whereas before it was, you've got to be a AAA game or we're not interested.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the style of a game like RuneScape. When I say style, I mean graphics. I mean gameplay. I mean tone. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for a console. I do think it's appropriate for a tablet, and we've looked at various different ways in which we could get RuneScape running on a tablet, and it's so complicated. We'd be better off writing something from scratch, and that's what we're playing around with right now.
One other question I wanted to ask, because it's kind of personal to me, because I remember in year 7 going into school one day,
right?
And, early days of year 7, everyone's desperate to make friends. This group of guys back corner of the classroom all talking about RuneScape. I remember it vividly. They were sort of arranging trades for when they got home that night.
Wicked.
I've got 4 wood. I'll trade you for this. I'll trade you for that. So I had to kind of get into it. But then we all kind of stopped playing it eventually.
Grew up.
Do you think there is this kind of stigma, I guess, that RuneScape is for kids and isn't something? But then I guess that goes against what you said earlier about people that have been playing it for 6 years. Still
look, let's be honest, right? You could. There are Pokemon games that come out every day, not every day, every year, right? And people pick them up because they used to love Pokemon a long time ago. But you don't get a lot of new kids playing Pokemon these days, right? It's moved. There are Pokemon games getting made which are getting built with adults in mind, even though it has a very kind of kiddie vibe to it. Anything that you remember when you were a kid that is still around now, you're either going to say that's very old because it's been around for a while. Like I say, we've got people who have played RuneScape for 10, 12 years, the same game. Like, that does not make any sense to the rest of the games industry, particularly console players, because you kind of get something, you go through your single player mode, if it's got one, you rinse the multiplayer, and then you kind of move on to a new game, and you kind of very transient in the way that you're moving between your games. PC gamers, MMO gamers, don't really think in that way. They kind of stick to one thing that they like, and then it's modded and various different versions. So of course people are going to say, oh, RuneScape's a bit old or it's for kids, because they remember it when they were a kid from a long time ago. There's nothing I can do about that. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the people who are still playing it, and the thousands and thousands of people who come back to the product every single day after being gone for years, that they have an experience that they think is modern and fresh, but also has that nostalgic vibe of what they experienced before. And there is nothing wrong with that in my mind. If someone says to me, oh, I remember playing RuneScape when I was a kid, that makes me happy. Doesn't make me disappointed that they think it's a kid's game. We have a crazy demographic of people that play RuneScape because people have grown up with it as a product. Yes, we still have teenagers running around, but I always laugh because we've got people that play the game. So there were parents of kids, and their kid played this game, and they're like, I should probably go and check that game out. And good on them. They actually went and played it themselves. Those parents still play, the kids don't anymore. Then you get a lot of that. You get cool stories of like kids who used to love going fishing with their granddad, right? But for some reason their parents work in the forces and they've had to move across the other side of the world, and the kid still manages to fish with his granddad while playing RuneScape. And that maybe neither of them play much anymore, but they get together every couple of months and play a bit of RuneScape and have a chat. What is wrong with that? Like, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, people can call it an old kids game. I don't care.
How do you go, because you used the Pokemon example as a lot of people that play Pokemon are people that have always played Pokemon.
Yeah.
Is that the same case with RuneScape? And how do you go about attracting new players who didn't grow up with RuneScape and might be, 11, 12, 13 years old now and maybe looking for a game to get into? What about RuneScape would perhaps attract them to it?
So we have a fantastic tutorial that we rewrote a couple of years ago. We're always looking at the game with new players in mind, But we know that the majority of our attention is based on players that have played it before. We don't go out of our way to attract new customers all of the time. We know that people will come to RuneScape and they'll be recommended it by their friends, and we make sure that their experience is a good one. But if they've got someone in the game they can rely on, you can never write a better tutorial than having a mate that you can send a message in the game and say, tell me what's going on. You can't beat that. It's not possible. So we've cleaned up a lot of our systems. Our interface is a lot more manageable. It's a lot more readable. Like, the game makes sense for a new player. It is still an awesome experience. The narrative and stuff that you find in RuneScape you won't get anywhere else. I always challenge people to find me an MMO which has better storytelling in it than RuneScape, and you won't. I know that. So I know the game is still good for new players, but we don't waste loads of energy trying to go and get them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
good.
I was kind of going to ask you to kind of try and, like, if I gave you a sentence or two to pitch RuneScape to a new player, what would you say? So the line I always say is a laid-back eccentric medieval fantasy adventure. If you want to have an experience in a game unlike any other that you will have had before, then give something like RuneScape a go. You can, yeah, that's more than a sentence, but yeah, laid back, eccentric, medieval fantasy adventure, unlike any other. The scary bit now, I have questions.
Yeah, good.
From the community.
Oh, okay, so these are going to be angry ex-players.
Somebody was asking about the game moving beyond being powered by Java.
Okay.
And is it C++?
Yep.
What is that going to bring to the game? Like how much further might you be able to take the visuals or the way it performs compared to how it is now? So Java is causing problems these days, unfortunately. There are a lot less operating systems that are prepared to deal with Java. And it just will trigger a whole load of antivirus stuff going on, and it's just not the accessible platform that it should be. So we had to move. If we don't move, then people won't be able to play RuneScape. That's no good. So we've been working for a while. We worked a couple of years ago on an HTML5 engine, and that gives us a much better quality of graphical fidelity. It means that we can, the textures that we play around with in the game are much more vibrant. The color palette that we can use is much better. So it gives you a much more immersive experience within you when you're in the game graphically. We've got cool things like water reflections. Like the game, if you put RuneScape, what it looks like today, what it will look like in a year's time, what it looked like 3 years ago, and then go back through. It's ridiculous. You're looking at the same place. You can still go to the same place and pick the same berries, or kill the same monster, but it just looks so much of a more engaging experience. Immersion is a hugely important thing to us because we treat our storytelling so seriously. So from a graphical perspective, you've got that. From an audio perspective, we're using real instruments. We have real live recordings that we use in the game. We could never have done that before because it was all MIDI sounds. You get a lot less lag, so your experience in the game is a lot better. You don't find yourself waiting on loading breaks and things like that. It also allows us to start playing around with some cooler things in the future, like getting rid of the grid. Because we're a grid-based game, when you move around in a world, you're stood on a square, and you're in the middle of a square. Yeah. You can't be on the edge of a square. And as soon as you play a game like that, it makes you feel like you're playing like an early 90s game, which you are. Right? Or, sorry, early 2000 game, because that's exactly what you're doing. So all of those things are improved with the new engine stuff that we're doing. But we're always doing it with the player in mind, so it means that there shouldn't be any new friction for them playing the game. And if they used a downloadable client before, there still will, and they won't experience any different, apart from all the cool things I just talked about. Somebody asked how you're careful about balancing things like microtransactions, and because I talk about the stigma of RuneScape being a kids game. There's also a stigma about free-to-play games.
Yep.
And how do you balance it being like you've got to be careful about it not becoming paid to win, I
yep.
suppose, and people maybe looking at another player and thinking, he's
yep.
only better than me because he's paid
yes.
a tenner and I'm not.
Yep.
So how do you balance
with a lot of care and attention.
Yeah.
So I have a business intelligence team is about 6 or 7 strong, and they will look at the data of what's going on in the industry and kind of movements. So they let us know where RuneScape sits in terms of everything else. I have a games intelligence team within the RuneScape team, and all they do every day is look at data. And we have targets in mind when we create a new piece of equipment or some new thing that you could win in Treasure Hunter. And we're very careful. We know exactly the kind of impact that we want it to make in the game. For me, MTX is about quality of life. If you don't have the time to invest in the game, but you want to see your character progress, then you can invest in stuff like that. If you have the time to play the game, then you will never need to spend money. That's what I've always said. Because we brought in things like the bonds system as well, which I don't know if you know too much about that, but there are a few games in the market right now which is play to pay. Play to pay. So you could earn gold in the game and swap it with someone else for membership.
Right.
So if you were saying, I want some of those things, but I haven't got enough real world money, you can effectively make gold in the game and buy a bond from someone else who's bought the bond for real world money, and then you use that bond to get the currency that you need to spin the wheel to get the item.
Okay.
So from that perspective, you can get all the cool stuff by just playing the game. And that's the right balance for me. I'm not going to say that it's easy. There are always going to be things. We did some things last year and we got our numbers wrong. We know that we got the numbers wrong. But within hours, the game intelligence team can say to me, these numbers that we're seeing in the game is not the same as what you said it was going to be. We've got a community management team who are listening to the players, and the players are saying this is not quite right. We've got an active team and an engine that we can change immediately. So we don't have to take the game down for 2 hours to make a patch or an update. We can do it in seconds. So if we do identify a problem, we can get in there and fix it straight away. And that is like one of the advantages that RuneScape has over everybody else. We have minimal downtime. So most games in a week will probably be down for 2-3 hours. We're probably down for about 2 minutes. So we can deal with things as we go along.
This is quite a good question.
Good. They've all been good questions.
As someone who works on RuneScape, spends hours and hours staring at it every day in the office,
yep.
Can you still enjoy playing it as like a hobby?
Yeah. So, I remember reading an interview years ago with this famous film star, and he said one of the favourite things he likes to do is put on his shades and his Mac and his hat and go down and watch one of his films, and then go to a bar, follow some people, go to a bar afterwards and just hear them talk about his game or his film. I love that. So I absolutely love going on the forums and talking to players when I'm not the J-mod, when I'm not Mod Mark. I'm just some dude. I have 6 or 7 accounts that I actively use all the time, and I go in and I enjoy the game as a player. If you are someone who is responsible for giving feedback, you need to be able to put on the hat of a normal player. And in order to do that, you have to be able to enjoy the game, forgetting that you work here. Like, I get frustrated with people who only play the game using our test servers, because if you want to teleport somewhere, you just hold shift click and click on a map. And whereas the players probably had to spend 10 minutes getting there, fighting through blah 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 blah, they don't have the same experience. So it's really, really important to us that people can still enjoy the game. And we have active high score tables in this building, where people competing against each other in the game, even though they still make it. We're probably 200 people strong on that high score table.
This is quite a serious question about politics, which
okay.
I did not expect. But
all right.
There was the budget speech last week. George Osborne was talking about tax breaks for game developers.
Yep.
I guess that's a massive positive for a team like Jagex.
Yes and no. as someone deeply interested in politics, I tend to ignore most of the promises that are made pre-elections.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, like in Prime Minister's Question Time yesterday, day before? Yesterday, they basically worked out what £200 billion worth of money, how that was going to function after the elections. And it didn't seem to me that there was a huge amount of politics behind it. It was just two blokes shouting at each other saying, my dad's bigger than your dad. And so I don't pay too much attention to it, I'll be honest with you. Tax breaks for games companies are a really important thing, and it would be fantastic if they went through on their promises. They have had them in Scotland for a while. Places like Canada have got massive tax breaks for games companies, various different states or provinces, I should say, in Canada, that really look after games developers. And I was at BAFTA a couple of weeks ago, and they had a part of the Lord Mayor's office there, which was talking about how important the games industry is to London. And generally speaking, if London starts doing stuff, then the rest of the country follows a couple of years later. So, you know, hats off to Boris if he's doing that.
I've got some sort of quick fire questions.
Yeah, okay. I'll try and give you quick fire answers.
What is your favourite game of all time?
My favourite game of all time is Laser Squad.
Okay.
It's a turn-based strategy game that I used to play on my Amstrad CPC 464. Was made by Bitmap Brothers, I think. I can't remember. But yeah, that's my favourite game of all time. Sometimes someone will ask me that question and I'll say original Super Mario Kart on the SNES.
Yeah.
But what? Yeah, one of those two definitely.
Have you got a game that you are most looking forward to?
I can't wait to see some proper games on the Oculus Rift.
Yeah. Where
it actually feels like it's a game made for playing through an Oculus Rift.
Do you ever consider Oculus Rift RuneScape?
Well, funnily enough, last year at RuneFest, our big fan convention, we had some Oculus Rifts and we had players walking around our Elf City, which we'd released a couple of weeks beforehand. So you can actually walk around inside RuneScape using an Oculus Rift, and people were almost wetting themselves.
Have you got a developer that you look up to? Not necessarily the team, like maybe an individual.
Yes, I'm going to give you a slightly off-the-wall answer. The designer I look up to the most is someone called Rainer Knitzer, who's a board game designer, who's an incredibly good board game designer, and always make sure that there are huge amounts of variety in each of the games that they design, but there's so many fundamentals which are the same. So there's this comfort that you experience when you're playing one of their games. You know it's one of their games, but it feels completely different to everything else that they've made. That's gold. Like, really, really, really special if you can do that.
Do you have a console of choice when you're not playing on PC?
Because I can get away with saying that my games play is research, I have all the consoles.
Oh, okay.
So I don't really have a favourite. I think of the current generation, PS4 is my favourite.
Okay. What was the last game you played to completion?
Or
just played?
The last game I played was yesterday evening, which is The Wolf Among Us.
Okay.
Which is a Telltale.
Yes. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
The Game of Thrones one is really good. So
yeah, I'm one of these people that prefers to buy a box set than wait a week for an episode.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm going to get into the Game of Thrones stuff until they've completed the season. It's the same with that Life is Strange game.
Okay.
I know that is good, and I know that the next part's coming out in a couple of days, or has just come out. Yeah, and like that looks good, but I feel like I want to consume it all in one go.
Yeah.
At Wolf Among Us, like if I'm like, oh well, I thought that chapter was going to be an hour and a half, and it's actually been 40 minutes. I want to play another one. I don't want to wait for a week.
Do you prefer Marvel or DC?
No.
You neither. Okay. That's a refreshing answer.
I love comics, but I'd much rather read Cerebus or or Chew, which is the one I'm really into at the moment, or Goon, the Goon, than any, or even 2000 AD if I'm going to go back and be a proper old school. I've never really been a massive fan of superheroes. I'm more interested in villains.
If you could work on another famous IP property within games, or make a game based on something else,
yeah,
what would it be? What would be your dream?
Monkey Island.
Monkey Island?
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool. But that's not your favourite game of all time?
No.
Oh,
No.
Okay. Fair enough.
I could pick big holes in Monkey Island.
Okay.
But I love it. And if I was going to make a game, that's what I would make.
What level, or I guess as you said you've got a few RuneScape characters, what's the highest level?
Between all of my accounts, I am maxed out. So I've got like highest level in all skills if you rolled all my accounts together. But actually the account that I play the most, I play socially, so they don't have any 99s. So yeah, I think my I've got a character which is matched combat, so yeah, I'm max.
And that's the last one, but my own personal follow-up, if you could estimate, if it's even possible, how many hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of hours you spent playing RuneScape.
I could tell you.
Do you know the exact number?
I could tell. We could go and look in the support system. We could add it up. So I've got one account which has got over 500 days of play.
Wow.
So that's 500 times 24. So that's over 500 days of play. That's hours. So that's there you go. So well over 12,000 hours.
Wow.
On one of my accounts. That's and impressive. I would think if you would combine all of those accounts, then it would probably be 30 or 40,000.
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't really do that so much anymore now I've got a family and kids. But I always still find a way. Well, like even when I'm playing Wolf Among Us, right? I can play that and I can chop down trees at the same time. It's not a problem.
Exactly. That's all I've got.
All right.
Thanks very much.
No worries, man.
I'll cut this camera.